I frequently watch lectures that are provided on that are conducted on TEDx platform. It's very often very inspiring, very interesting. But I have noticed recently that there is a huge, well, to some extent, one could say that there is something as of a campaign going on against the nuclear weapons, which are not so much not so much against nuclear energy. Thank God, but against uh, nuclear weapons. And this is very intriguing because I have watched recently. Because what I especially value about TEDx lectures is that they are promoting basically the scientific approach towards complicated problems. And this is very much worthwhile, and this is a very noble cause. And I am 100% for it. But recently I have observed that they are sometimes putting stress on this, and they are really promoting this emotional, romantic approach to some problems, which is very disturbing even. Because, for instance, you can if you approach the complicated topic in which you can have both emotional and rational scientific approach. For instance, let's take the aeroplanes. Most people are they fear aeroplanes. They fear to fly in aeroplanes, in planes and on planes, and they think that it's very probable that it would be a disaster in skies. But it's not so. They only imagining things because they imagine that if they would go on train or in their personal cars, or by their personal cars, they would be in a much more secure situation. And the reality is very far from that. Just having the pilot, just having this free way in the skies, and having much more space for transportation in the skies than on roads and on and for the trains and so on, uh, and having much more expertise for a person who is well the person who is making this vehicle move. So in this case, a pilot is much more experienced in being a pilot than an average average person driving a personal car. The expertise on the side of the pilot, and still most people would have the emotional approach that they are understanding what a car is, and they confuse the better understood with the safer. The same is with nuclear power plants, for instance. You can both have scientific approach, and you can have the emotional approach, the romantic approach, the idiot's approach. And the idiot's approach would be to think that nuclear energy in power plants, for instance, is very much unsecure and so insecure and so on. And the situation is just the opposite again, because nuclear power plants have maybe killed like 300 people in the whole course of history. After Chernobyl, for instance, there were thousands of studies conducted in the area, and it showed that there was a few percent of on the effect of the for the well cancer among children, something like this, is several percent higher probability, but nothing much to be worried about in general. And on the other hand, one would think that the water power plants, using the energy of the rivers and oceans, would be something that is much more secure. the biggest installation of this kind, the biggest plant of this kind, the water plant, would be the power plant. That would be one in China. That's that it's so have amassed so much water that if it failed, if it crashes, then something like 40 million people would be very rapidly underwater, and it would kill millions. So again, we have the romantic approach: water is safe, water means life, and so on. Yes, water gives life, but water also takes life. Water is the most deadly factor, natural factor in the world, especially if you try to make water power plants. So it's a very dangerous what it's a very dangerous technology. So the scientific approach would clarify that and would point out that nuclear power plants are far less dangerous, and water power plants are far more dangerous than people usually would think. So so again, we have this clear division: what's scientific, what's not. With nuclear war, is more or less the same. So this Brian Toon fellow, who has well, that's my problem with the TEDx platform recently, because they are sometimes there was a yogi invited, and this psychological meditation rubbish connection with the universe was promoted, and so on, instead of this maybe sad but rationally proven vision of the universe, which is well, not friendly to people, but also not unfriendly. Yes, that people that the neutral universe. And this there was a lecture provided by a yogi against this scientific vision. So it was funny. The yogi was very sympathetic and everything, but still, I don't know how it went to the TEDx platform, on the TEDx platform. And the same with Brian Toon's lecture. He has started his lecture saying that saying some things about the dinosaurs which were hit by the asteroid, as we all know, in 65 million years ago, and they basically were cooked. And then some dinosaurs that were not cooked by the impact and by the glowing skies, then they were starved because the sunlight was cut off by the smoke, by the dust, and so on for 3 years, and only a smallish and small animals were well survived. So that's said that if you want to imagine what happened to the dinosaurs, you just would have to go into your oven in your kitchen and something like this. When the oven is, of course, heated and working. So, and he moved from that to the situation because all his lecture was entitled I have studied the nuclear war for 35 years, and you should be worried. You should be worried. And he did not think about the absurdity of his own lecture title. For instance, 35 years of nuclear war. That means what? The nuclear war theory, right? Because there was no such thing as the nuclear war in the last 35 years. There was not such thing ever as a nuclear war. There were two nuclear hits by two nuclear bombs on Japan, against Japan, during the last phase of the during the last period of the last stage. I mean of the World War II, and that was basically it. People got so scared of the atomic bomb that they never used it again, and that's the good thing, another bad thing, in my opinion, because people are scared to use the atomic weapons. And what I think that is providing us with the peace, basically, because what we have today in the world is contrary to what we may think again, and that's why also it's a very important thing to provide people with the scientific outlook on things. that we tend to think that maybe there's more and more war and conflict in the world, and there's exactly the opposite. There is something like 20 local wars conducted in the world today, which is an which is a very, very, very low number. It used to be more. And what we have no global conflicts. We have no conflicts between the powerhouses. We have no conflict between the empires. We have no China USA war. We have no Russia USA war. We have no things like that. We have only proxy wars. That means that if the in the smallish and weakish country there is a war between two parties, for instance, let's say communists against people who prefer capitalism or something like this, then the United States would, for instance, engage on one side, and they wouldn't declare it, but they would support them with weapons or something like this, and Russia or China on the other side. We had this just recently in Syria. In Syria, Russia supported the president Bashar al-Assad, and the Free Army of Syria was supported by the United States. United States withdrew their support when they have concluded that the Free Army of Syria was, as far as personnel is concerned, intertwined with the Islamic State, and they were basically some of the warriors for the Free Army of Syria were in fact part-time terrorist soldiers for the Islamic State. So the United States concluded that it's not very good for PR, and they have withdrew their support. Russia lied on that the United States were perfectly aware of the situation, but they still wanted Bashar al-Assad to lose, and that's why. But Russia says many interesting things which are not exactly true. So okay, so we saw this proxy war, and those proxy wars. Well, I can live with. I accept that people are tragically biased, and they want to they live on this planet just because of these biological limitations of human organism, human system, biological system, just the limitation of biology. The people are living here for a few decades, and they want money, they want their interests to win, right? And they will stop at nothing, or stop at a few things, just only with the few exceptions, in pursuing their goals, right? So having this threat of the nuclear war, I think, has this sobering effect on human psyche. And this is a good thing and not a bad thing. And I can live with proxy wars. I just think, because this Brian Toon fellow, he was trying to make this impression as if he said that imagine that if your city has some important institute, or some oil supplies, or some military object in the neighborhood of your city, then there is a nuclear ballistic missile which is aimed at your city at this very moment. Yes, and it's true. But does not mean that it will be fired. It's not so easy to fire an atomic weapon on some city. You would have to make simultaneously this movement with the keys and so on. You would have to have much contact with the base and with the headquarters, and much talks and so on. It's not so easy just to fire an atomic weapon or something. So, and we also know where the 95% of all these ballistic missiles are kept because of the satellite systems, and the satellite systems provide us with information where those things are stored. And with the small exception of the nuclear powered submarines, which could be for months hiding below the surface of Arctics, for instance, of the ice of Arctics, and they can very much make a surprise attack, but that's an exception. So basically, we know who would win the war without fighting the war. I mean, empire versus another empire, right? So, like US versus China, US versus Russia, Pakistan versus India. We would know who would who would win the war without fighting it, and that's a good thing, not a bad thing. So I think that what Brian Toon is doing by attacking the concept of nuclear deterrence is an idiocy. He was his lecture has even an idiotic topic. I have this topic was, I remind here, I have studied the nuclear war for 35 years, and you should be worried. Yeah. Yeah. So there was no such thing. He has studied something that was never a thing, and there was never a nuclear war, and this did not occur to him, that he maybe it didn't came to his mind that he was studying something that never really materialized. So what he was exactly studying? The fear, the danger. There's always a fear, and the normal. It is also not a situation in which he was trying to make an impression that it would be less like one nuclear ballistic missiles would, for instance, wipe out the city of the size of New York out of the surface of the planet. It would not be so. To annihilate a city of the size of New York, you would need like 15 ballistic missiles, and this with Shanghai even 20, with Moscow because it's more densely populated, maybe 10. So it's not so easy, really. So this Brian Toon fellow, he was not really much aware of this military technology. He was just making this unscientific. What he was doing. He was making this unscientific approach. Well, trying to make this unscientific approach towards nuclear weapons legitimate. So, and I think it's much more. I am worried about that. That at on TEDx platform, you could have a lecture which is promoting unscientific approach towards nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. This is much more. I am worried about that after this watching this lecture. So, yeah, and that's why I made this idea.